the show within the show. The AMster and the Brits Code Corner. We take over AWS On Air, and we bring you code. I'm A.M. Grabelny, Solutions Architect here at AWS, joined by the Brit himself, Steve Roberts. Please tell us who you are.
Well, you just told them. I'm Steve Roberts, a developer advocate for .NET and PowerShell at AWS.
More importantly, though, Steve.
And we're back with our extra special guest,
Norm. We've got Norm with us.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. Please pity me for being with these two. Yes, I am Norm, the long-term .NET developer at AWS, doing all of the fun .NET stuff we do around here. So.
That's right. 12 plus years, Norm said in the last segment.
12. They just won't show me the door, even though I work from home mostly. But still.
They just forgot you were here, Norm.
Doors behind you, Norm.
So for this segment, we're going to be talking about deployment tools again for .NET
Part 2.
Code. But now we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of somebody working in Visual Studio, right?
Right. And we gave a teaser to this, remember, back at Remars in Code Corner, I guess episode 2, if we want to call it that. Return of whatever it is, the Clone Wars. I don't know. But yeah, we showed the toolkit and we showed what was then the preview version of the new deployment tooling. Now it's fully released.
Oh, so Norm, what changes have been made to the typical experience in the Visual Studio? Because there's always been deployment from Visual Studio to AWS as long as I've known you all, because I haven't been using it longer than 12 years. So what was the previous deployment experience, and what's changed in the one today?
So the new experience, we kind of talked about a little bit previously, how, one, we're trying to make the focus a lot more on the application than the service than you're trying to go to. Like, put the application first, and try to make sure the terminology is in a more sort of neutral way, so you don't have to be an expert of AWS to just get started, right? There's a language to AWS as you get to it, right? So that's a hard thing to get to. So let's make sure we're speaking in the language that we're talking about, and also, like, if you want to just get started, like, definitely if you're deploying from Visual Studio, most likely you're the developer I'm just trying to kick the tires. I want to see what this whole AWS thing is about. So we want you to be able to get your application from Visual Studio out to AWS in as few clicks as possible, right? You can go dive down as deep as you want, but let's not bog you down. Let's, like, if I can get deployed in like a couple clicks, that's great. So definitely, and I think we're going to talk about more as well. The system under the covers is a lot more dynamic than what we used to have in the old Wizard. Like, Steve and I can remember, like, manually creating those WPF forms and trying to squeeze that last little control in there, right?
Happy days.
Happy days, right? So in the new system, we're trying to make it we have made it a more generic system. So we're going to show in this section how, there's some pre-described ways of deploying it, but you can customize it yourself as a team. You can define, like, this is how we deploy, and this is how I want Visual Studio to look like. Like, you can actually change the UI inside Visual Studio for it. So it's a lot more dynamic of a system. So.
Cool.
I like how the motivations change, right? So when we were taking the CLI, a lot of the motivations came in to be around, like, how do I deploy this, in a non-interactive way? You definitely had to take into account that -- silent command that you showed us and things like that. And how do I pull in settings? But like you said, and not to call anyone out here, but it's very unlikely that you are deploying to production from Visual Studio. So completely different motivations for the experience that you then build as the person building the tool into Visual Studio, I would imagine. Fewest clicks, I thought, was a really interesting thing you said.
Right. But you see, like, what it looks like what we're going to talk about between these two sessions, like, these are two different tools.
Right.
Reality, it's not. Like, it is one tool that's got two different front ends. And that's actually how we designed it. Like, there is a core orchestrator we talk about. And then there's a CLI front end, and there is a Visual Studio front end, and they're just driving of the same experience. So you can go in between. Like, If I'm a hardcore Visual Studio developer, that's great. Go for it. If I am a VS Code user, right, you're probably not wanting a giant, wizard inside Visual Studio Code. But here is this CLI experience. You can easily, deploy your Visual Studio Code from in there. So, and it's,
so can I round trip with this? So if so let's say that half of my team are working in Visual Studio and the other half prefer to use the command line, but they can all share the same essential settings, right?
Yeah, it's the same experience, same ones. You can definitely click and you can use the same deployment CloudFormation stacks to play the same ones. Okay. So definitely,
I remember that was an important thing we did when we had the original .NET CLI extensions, right, for Lambda and ECS and Beanstalk, was you could round trip between Visual Studio and the CLI. So we've still got that capability.
Yep. Absolutely. I mean, that's important, right? Teams are, the days of everyone on a team all using Windows and Visual Studio is, we're not in those days anymore. Like, it's still largely Visual Studio, but every team's got their AM using Visual Studio Code or Rider.
You're welcome.
You know it. So
every team's got their AM. Oh, I pity them.
I'm one of a kind, so I don't think that's true.
You certainly are, sir. You certainly are. All right. So, shall we go see it?
All right.
All righty.
All right. So back to amazing UI skills. This is my demo application we're going to do this time. It is a simple application that allows me to look up zip code information. Like I live in Redmond, Washington, so this is my zip code. If y'all want to send me fan mail, there you go. Good luck figuring it out.
All suggestions for improving your UI skills, which I see you have taken notes since the previous session. This is better.
It's a little better, we can go look to see this is all the zip codes of Washington, all those things. So it is a very powerful application.
Steve is a harsh critic in terms of UI, by the way, Norm. Yeah. So don't take it personally. He's just very harsh.
I used to have to take Norm's WPF designs and then actually, fix them. So,
I always loved a good big button application.
He too. He does like a big button up. Yeah.
So again, this is a super simple application. Here it is, like we're using DynamoDB. It's got some controllers that are just using that to go find like information, whether it's state or code. And ultimately, this is all pulling from a DynamoDB table I've already created and filled full of zip code information. So
we've got a pre-existing DynamoDB table, and somehow the name of that table is getting passed into this application, right?
Yep. So there's all of our data in here. So in Visual Studio, I could start right-click deploying right now by just going over here, and this is our new experience, the publish to AWS. Notice we're not saying a service; we're just saying I want to publish to AWS. Now, for anyone that is not ready, they've got some dependency on the old wizard or something like that, we haven't removed it. It's still there. We're marking it as legacy. We'll keep it there as long as it's needed. But anyone who's really tied to it, we really encourage you to let us know what's missing in our new feature so we can figure out how to get there, right? So our ultimate goal is to make a great new experience on there. So, but yeah.
We should briefly mention before we go on that the new experience is open source.
It is.
Right, for the CLI. So, there's a GitHub repo. We'll get that link added to the feed, but you can go and give us feedback there.
So, if I click on this one, you can see this is actually, it's started, I think we talked about before, it's starting that CLI experience in the background. So it's really working back and forth on that one. That is, I teased, that's the signal R connection we got going back and forth. That's letting us know all the information going here. Like, we saw that recommendation screen in the CLI. It's showing the same thing. This is the recommendations that we see it.
It was the server mode setting, right, Norm?
Yep, this is the server mode setting.
Right. And one thing I've noticed straight away actually is that these options, and we saw it the CLI one. Some of these are container-based services.
Right.
But looking in the Solution Explorer, there's no Docker file in there.
Yep, and that's why we did this Beanstalk first, because we see it doesn't look like you're necessarily up for containers, but we do have a lot of powerful container services at AWS, and we want you to be able to take advantage of those. So we still show them up as options, and if you select those, the tooling will generate you a Docker file. We'll look to see your project structure. These are your class libraries. We'll do at least our best attempt. Now, you might need to tweak that afterwards. And we're going to generate it inside your project folder. But yeah, you can take advantage of trying to do those, even if you haven't done it.
The interesting that popped out to me was like in the old wizards that we had, we didn't show the publish to ECS wizard unless you had a Docker file in the project.
Right.
Right. Now we don't need to have the Docker file. We can just infer that, yes, you could potentially put this into a container service.
And we'll throw in a Docker file for free.
And we'll throw in a Docker file for free. Right.
It's all good. And I think that goes back to, like, we're going to try to give you, this is the guided path. And, we're going to tell you what we're going to be doing. But we don't want to hide anything from you, right? Like, this is a guided path. But if you want to try something else, you just know better than we do. It's there for you. We're not going to take anything away. But in theory, like, here we go. This is like, we're going to say, this is just like your regular ASP.NET Core application. It's not containerized. We think you should do Beanstalk. And I could push publish right now and it would just spin up. Like, that's all I would have to do. Here's going to be the name of the stack. But we could get a deployment within really, essentially, it was 2 clicks, right?
2 clicks, right?
And push there. So now, obviously, there's many times you want to change some of those settings. And so we can kind of go to that edit settings section. And this is kind of like that CLI experience we saw before, where all those settings that are available, you can do here, and I can even, like, if I change it from single instance to load balance, it's going to like add more settings of, do you want application load balancers and things like that. So it, has that sort of built-in logic to figure out, based on these settings, there's even more applicable settings and things like that. So again, I could go through here, make some settings. I think the only one I really need to do is probably set my IAM role, which I could do here. Right? It's got a nice screen here. I can go and click on that, pick my roles. But I wanted to, again, I want to show we had an easy deployment. I could push publish and ready to go. But a lot of times customers, they have more complicated systems, right? They have other resources they want to deploy. Life's not always the simple, happy path, right? So we do have ways to actually customize this whole deployment. So let's talk about that then. So I'm going to close. I'm not going to actually deploy. I'm going to close this down. And we have this concept in the new tooling called deployment projects, where actually it's a project that manages the whole deployment for you.
Okay.
Now, to create that deployment project, you can't currently do that in Visual Studio. To create the deployment project, you have to go back to the CLI. But once you create it, then you will be able to use it inside Visual Studio.
Okay.
So I'm going to switch over. Here's where I am. We have this .NET AWS deployment project, and I want to just say generate. I want to generate a deployment project. This is going to go look to see what my project is, and it's going to, it's got that same recommendations screen to say, I want to create a deployment project based off of that recommendation, right? It's like the starting point. So you're not like creating everything basically from scratch. I'm going to say, I want to, start from the Beanstalk recipe. There we go. So that's all it is to create a deployment project. It gets saved as a sibling to your project. You could customize the output. There is a switch you could pass in to say where you want it to be persisted. But I'm going to just go and add that to Visual Studio so we can go and look at it there. So here is our deployment project. Now, the reason I think we want to customize, in our case, this simple case, is we've got a dynamic table that we want to be part of our application, right? Our application needs to know where to go find the zip code information. And if you look how this is coded, right? This is coded as go look for an environment variable, and based off that environment variable, use that table. So we need a way for users to pick the table that they want to use. So there's 2 parts to a deployment project. There is a recipe file. That's this guy here. It's a JSON document that basically drives that whole UI experience. This is where I'm saying you can make that UI experience, customize it any way you want, because you can define it yourself. This is how all the names, the settings, everything's synced. For example,
so I could customize this and then share it with my team or other teams.
Yes, like here, my recommendation. If you create a deployment project here, like it's in, you should like check it in the source control.
Yeah.
And then now, whenever anyone who pulls up the source control, they've got the deployment project. And when in a minute, when we launch the wizard again, we're going to see the top recommendation now is our deployment project. So
okay. So if I have like common conventions or I have particular requirements around deployments,
yep,
I can code them in a recipe and then share them.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, let's customize this a little bit here, right? Right now it's got some very boring names and descriptions. I'm going to go to my cheat sheet here because no one wants to watch me type here. So we're just going to change the name and descriptions. So that's what we'll see like when we deploy. This is our zip code lookup, right? So
okay.
You have all those customizations there. This is some of the rules that we use for the recommendation engine. I don't want to get too much into that, but that's sort of how it gets chosen, whether it's compatible. We saw in Visual Studio, there's that whole list of categories on the left side of your settings. Like again, that's all defined here. You could create all new settings or categories to put your settings in there and stuff like that, right? And then yeah, here's all the list of settings, and there's a lot you can do with settings. You can make very hierarchical settings of like, whether I want to create a new Beanstalk application or use an existing one. You can have a lot of ways of putting validations on there because we really wanted to like make you get the error messaging right away. So there's a lot of power in setting validators. You can even control like when something is valid. Like this setting, the setting an application name is only a valid setting if we said we want to create a new one, right? So you can kind of control those settings as well. So to add a new setting, so again, I'm going to go to my cheat sheet. And just put that here. So here is a new setting I just made up. It is, I want to know what is the existing table name. What table name? We're going to keep the example pretty simple for here. Like I probably, if in a full demo, I would say, do I want to create a new table or use an existing one and do all that? We're just going to keep it simple and say, I want a drop-down picker of the Dynamo tables for the customer to pick which table to use.
Okay.
So here, and we give our names and descriptions of the UI, and it's just a string. In the Visual Studio and the CLI, okay, for strings, use this type of UI control. For ints and bools and all those, right? So this is how you can control that UI just by the data type, and the UI screen is dynamically generated based off that screen.
Okay.
Now we do have also the concept of type hints because obviously a lot of strings mean something, right? In this case, we know this is a Dynamo table, right? So I could not have this and it'd just be a text box and the customer could type whatever string they want. But there's no guarantee that it's actually there's no checking on that. So we have quite a few defined type hints in our system that say this string, we know it's supposed to be a table. And that gives our front ends, because remember we talked about how essentially it's like two different front ends. It tells the front end, for this UI control, whether that is the CLI or Visual Studio, provide a list. They go list all the tables, so I can just pick that out of there. So again, you can kind of easily pick, customize that UI screen. And we have quite a few type hints for like listing your buckets, your queues, your topics, as well as a lot of other infrastructure resources. But this is definitely where I encourage, like, this is an open source project. If you find there's type hints that you think we should add, let us know. They're not hard for us to add, but we just need to prioritize which order to do them in.
That's super cool. That's just like the difference between just a blank text box and going out and actually making a call to your AWS account and getting all the DynamoDB tables just by one line. That's really neat.
Now, this file, like I said, controls all of the UI. So the UI now knows everything about how to present and ask, and it's going to collect that data from the user. So the second part of a deployment project is the CDK project under the covers. Well, it's not under the covers, actually. It's part of the deployment project that we need to respond to that setting, right? We've got the setting. Now we need to actually do something with it. So the way these projects are designed, and they're using .NET. It's a .NET project, right? So essentially, we get it's using the configuration systems. It's pulling all that stuff in there, and we have all the configuration settings, sort of mapped into here in all these files.
Okay.
And so I can add the new setting by just saying public. I have to spell public string, and then you want to use the ID of that setting. So if you see that value that looks like I just made it up, I didn't. It's the value that came from here, right? Because essentially, you can imagine we're collecting a JSON document of all your settings, and they get serialized over that configuration object. So based off that, so that's now we know that the setting will be passed into our CDK system. So now all we got to do is actually do something with it there. Now, the way we laid out, I mean, the CDK project, and you can change this any way you want. Like this was just our default style of doing this. Was we sort of wanted to separate the code that was part of that initial recipe. Like when we said Beanstalk, this is the code that we generated for. And that's all in this generated folder. And you can see it, right? And this is that we don't want to hide anything from you. Like you can see this is all the CDK code that we do. All right, and it's a great tool for learning the CDK because you don't have to start from scratch. You can see this is all that it took to do it. Now, you can choose to either like say, I want to just directly modify this code as part of my deployment project. I own this. I'm going to do whatever I want. That's perfectly fine. You also might not want to do that because you want to leave that code alone so that if we make changes to that initial project, the one that you copied from, you could essentially go regenerate it and just copy it all over here. So it's sort of like a separation.
Okay.
So if you intend to keep, be in sync with the original recipe, you probably don't want to edit this code directly. But if you don't care, you're saying, I know what I'm doing, I'm just going to do it, then again, do what you want. And that's again why you see all these, like even the configuration classes are all partial classes. Like these are all the ones from from our system. But if you want to make your own settings, I put it in the partial class that's not in the generated folder. So I know that sounded super confusing, but again, it's up to you. You can
very powerful.
Very powerful.
Right.
You can do. If you are going to make it so you don't change the generated code, this is where we recommend you do it, is in this Appstack class.
Okay.
So the Appstack class, this is represented essentially as the CloudFormation stack. This is like the root in CDK. And so here, I could go in and add a bunch more resources. Like if I was creating my CloudFormation template, I could use the CDK to go define that table all right here, or any other application resources I want to do. But if you want to modify, like I don't necessarily want to change the stuff that's in that generated code, but I do want to modify it. Like in this case, I want to set an environment variable on that Beanstalk environment that's set up in here, right? So the pattern that we did is essentially we defined this sort of callback method that generated calls every time it's about to create a new CDK construct. So, when in CDK world, it works as in every construct you do, I know this is you create, I'm going to find a simpler example here. You always, I know there we go, let's go, you always create a property structure, right? It's always like, here's a property that contains all of the grab bags of the settings. Once you have that set, then you pass it into the CDK construct. This one is a bit more complicated to do. Of course, I chose. Yeah, here we go. It's like here's the props object that contains all the settings. That's going to invoke this callback method. So once that object is initiated from our generated code, there's a callback you can use to customize that even more, and then it gets passed to the construct. So what we're going to do is, and I'm going to go to my cheat sheet here because again, I don't want to. It's code, but I'm not typing it. So in our callback, let's see, we got a using statement there, right? So in our callback, we're seeing that, you're about to create the Beanstalk environment. And so we can say, okay, well, let's look at the props object. Let's cast that to there. And then we can actually go and modify that properties object. We can add yet another environment variable on there. This is our zip code table name. And we set that on there. And then we modify that props object. So this is a way, like before this CDK construct is created, modify any of the properties on there. And again, we didn't change any of that code. We just add extra customizations.
This is super cool. So we're kind of getting very close on time. So what does it look like when we actually deploy?
All right, yep, sorry.
We saw all the events coming through in the CLI experience. What is it like in Visual Studio?
Okay, yeah, we are perfect on areas. We're going to right-click, deploy. new target, and we can see there's our new recommendation, right? So we're showing up there. I've
Okay.
customized that.
Yeah.
I've now said edit, and did I not say? Did I? I think I forgot to click save. So bear with me. Demo fail. You can see I forgot to push save.
Oh yeah, there it is.
Now we will save. Very important.
Save all the things.
Happens
all
to
the
us
things.
all.
Okay. All right. There's our recipe. We're going to edit settings.
Now we'll get the dynamo.
There we go.
There it is.
Crisis averted. Now we have our existing table, and we can see it's a drop-down box, right? I just have that one table, but here you can see I was able to customize it and actually show this is our tables in here. Again, I need to give myself permission, so I'm going to set my role. So I got my Beanstalk demo. And there, I could go again through all the other settings, but overall, I can just push publish. And there we go. So now I was able to customize the experience, add new settings. I can share this with the rest of the team. Everyone can have that same sort of feel on there. And so this output looks very similar to the Visual Studio or the CLI experience. I'm going to switch over to our cooking channel version here. This is the one I did beforehand. And you can see, again, we did the whole deployment where we zipped up the bundle, created our CDK project, and we deployed it. And we get, here's our endpoint, right? So here it is. And I think we'll say for AM, we'll go to Texas, right? So many zip codes of Texas.
Oh yeah, it's a big place.
So, but yeah, so definitely a powerful way, even though, you know, a lot of people are using Visual Studio for, you know, the kicking the tires, but there's a lot of ways to customize that experience. And again, that deployment project is effective both in Visual Studio as well as from the CLI. So.
All right, that is super cool, Norm. Thanks for joining us to show us that. That is just great.
Yeah, very cool. All right. Norm, we hope you come back. But for now, we've got to move on and stay tuned for more content. On Air.